So you guys, I am so thankful for y'all coming on. Thank you, both of you, for joining us on the program. We're really, really excited to have you on to get to chat with you guys about books, because your podcast is so awesome and unique. But is it a podcast technically, or is it really like a YouTube channel that you've turned into a podcast?
Yeah, which was first? Chicken and egg.
So technically, I guess I cut the audio out of the video, but we also record now separately from the video. So I guess technically now it's a podcast and then a YouTube page.
Nice. Okay. Very
awesome.
Cool. Yep. I like that. I think that's really, really cool. It's fun to see you guys sitting there chatting and stuff like on YouTube, because someone can see your faces and your personalities and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we just changed locations from coffee shops where we're running into people, and mostly it's people who know Tony, because I don't know anybody. And then now we're just doing it in front of, the world.
Yeah. Very cool.
Which I'm so excited. I just subscribed to your YouTube and to your podcast. I'm so stoked to have you guys on the show.
Yeah,
it's so awesome.
Cool.
We haven't said anything yet, so you guys can always bury this
probably
one.
Need to wait.
Yeah.
No, I've already been such a huge fan. Whenever I first saw you guys was from I think Slim Jim, Veritas Domain, Pastor Jimmy. And I was like, what? No way. So the first episode of yours that I listened to was explaining a scientific theory. And now, of course, because I can't remember anything, I can't remember what it was. But it was so helpful to explain to me what in a way where I could understand this theory that was like over my head for years. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This is like a podcast made for me. This is like all of the things that I always want to hear.
If Tony can explain it to me, then if I understand it, then there's hope for everybody else.
There's hope, yes.
Yeah.
You break it down for people. I love that.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. My husband always says if you can't explain it to a child, then you don't understand it well enough.
Right.
So,
yeah. That's what Einstein tried to say.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, maybe that's where you got it from.
Well, no, I'm sure your husband got it first, and Einstein stole it from him.
Oh, that's a good point.
Or at least you should say that, right? Yeah.
I was going to say time travel, timey-wimey, wibbly wobbly stuff. Yep. Very cool. Very cool. So, guys, Becca and I were just talking before you got here about your name, Cave to the Cross, and she was telling me about your video. Where you were explaining that, but I haven't seen that. So for the listeners and for me, can you explain the awesome name of your?
Yeah, and did you guys make that video that's on there?
Oh, I don't think there's. Oh no. So you're talking just the blog post that I did
the blog post. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No. I was trying to find that claymation of explaining the cave analogy that Plato has in the Republic, and so that's my favorite one, and it's the shortest one out of all of them. But essentially, we of course wanted to tie in something really geeky that was philosophy based. We thought of like a analogy from salvation, or from death into salvation, and so Plato has this kind of cave analogy where there's a person who's seen nothing but shadows on a wall and views them as the truth. And one day he gets let loose and he gets to explore what's behind him and the other people that are on this wall, that all they've seen are the shadows. And he sees that they're really, flames that are casting shadows, that, people are holding up these like puppets of, demons and gods and whatever they might be. And so he sees the truth of what they are, and then he gets to experience life outside the cave, and then sees the glory of creation, or his version of it.
Forms.
Yeah, we're there's a lot of technical stuff within it too. Oops. And so we then took that as a analogy for kind of being rebirth, but in Plato's analogy, he goes back into the cave and is put back on the wall. And so there's questions there of like, should he have ever been let loose? How does he deal with knowing things and trying to communicate to other people? But we're never sent back to the wall. And so we're just then let loose, and we continue towards the cross and eventually our full salvation.
Yeah. So usually what you think of is cross and then the cave, the tomb, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we want a little twist to that as well. So we.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah.
I love
Yes.
that. That
That's
is
so
really
creative.
neat.
Right.
Okay, so any Plato fans already are going to see exactly what you meant there, but I love the Christian twist. Yeah, we're going to do. So, guys, before we get started talking about philosophy and books and all that good stuff, do you mind starting with your testimonies individually, how you came to faith and then how y'all met one another?
Yay.
Well, age before beauty. So I think Tony goes twice. Then he goes twice.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sweet.
So I let's see. I had an uncle who was probably an evangelist because he always shared his faith. In fact, when he greeted people like this: "Do you love the Lord?" That's how he greeted people. "Hi, my name is Eugene. Do you love the Lord?" That's what he would say.
That.
Nice.
What can they say, right? So he was an evangelist. This was in Chicago. That's where I was born, and we moved out to Michigan here when I was just a little kid. I started school out here. But anyway, I remember visiting my grandparents in Chicago when I was about 9 years old, and my uncle sat down with me and went over this gospel tract.
Wow.
And so I prayed to receive Christ at 9 years old, and then I got up and went with my cousins and went out to play and probably forgot all about it. But as the years went on, we didn't really go to church a whole lot when I was growing up, and so when I was in high school, I was a jock, but I did a lot of partying on the weekend and that kind of stuff. And I remember it was my senior year, and I just started thinking, do I really want to live my life like this, for the rest of my life? Do I really want to live like this for the rest of my life? And so I remember one night coming home and sitting in my bedroom, and I answered that question: no, I really don't. And so I cried out to God. I said, "Lord, would you change me and make me different than what I am?" And he did. He answered that prayer. I began reading through the New Testament. I wanted to get through it before my senior year, and the Lord used that to change my life. I went on to the university, got involved in a Christian group, and began to serve the Lord the best I could.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is awesome. Guys, give me just a second. I just realized that I left my air conditioner on. I don't want the footage to pick it up. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. That's so cool. So you guys both met in Michigan.
Yes.
Awesome.
Sorry about my Dallas Cowboys shirt then, guys. Y'all must be like, what, Vikings fans?
Well, that's
all
all right. You have as much hope in your team as we ever have. So
Sure.
It's fine.
It's a crap shot. It's okay. Okay, sorry about that. We'll be actually heading to Bismarck here in a little while. We've been wanting to get over to Michigan to get to see all the lakes and stuff, but we haven't gotten to so far. So maybe we'll get to
We've got a few.
Yeah. Hurry up, because it's starting to get cold. So hurry up. It's starting to get cold.
Right? Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll have to wait until spring for sure. We've had some friends from Bismarck send us pictures of their backyards where there's already like snow drifts and stuff, and I'm like,
oh yeah.
I don't know why we've tortured ourselves like this, but where we're gonna spend the winter. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea, but okay. So Tony, thank you so much for your testimony.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the Lord's good. I realized that I was a sinner. I needed a savior, and I cried out, and the Lord answered that prayer.
Wow.
And so,
how did your family respond to that? Your parents, did they respond well to it?
The whole family was transformed, quite frankly. They started going to church. They started reading their Bibles. It was kind of like, wow.
That's amazing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That is amazing. That's very rare that I hear that.
I know. I think that's the first time we've heard it.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why I asked that question, because a lot of times whenever I talk to people about getting saved, there's a lot of family members that maybe get not very happy. And so it's nice to give people a little bit of hope about, family members doing different things, and there's fruit in some areas. So that's really, really neat. I think that's really, really cool. just to get to hear a whole family. Did you have siblings?
So there was, I grew up with a younger sister and an older brother. So
Oh, okay.
Right in the middle.
yeah, I was the
Yeah.
middle kid.
So you rebelled in that you didn't rebel.
That's right.
Right? That's so interesting.
Well,
Because a senior's doing a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is really, really cool. Organized. Patrick, how about you? How did you come to
Well,
faith?
Tony provides hope, so I'm going to provide the opposite.
Okay.
Aw,
A good
the norm.
balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Catholic household. My dad converted from nominal Baptist to Catholicism to marry my mom,
Oh.
and then so we were raised as Catholic. So
Wow.
that was always a part of my life, and so there was, if you were to ask me up until the day up until around the time I started questioning, I would have told you, yes, I'm a Christian. I believe in God. Jesus, died on the cross, the Holy Spirit. I'm part of a church, all the things like that. But when you're Catholic, you are intimately aware of how the Roman Catholic Church teaches who God is every week, because he's far off, and depending on the type of priest you have, he's usually angry at you, and you're always having to question whether you've committed a mortal sin, and so you have to go to confession and make sure that every week, week after 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 week, you take the communion, because that's the thing that instantly elevates you back up to in good grace. And even still, if you die, then as long as you're not wearing the sepulchre, you have to go to purgatory to work off your sins. But I got a sepulchre, I think in 4th grade, and I didn't really take it off just in case I died, and then I wouldn't have to go to purgatory.
Wow.
And so that was always in the forefront of who I understood as God. He was usually far off. He was angry. He hated sin, but he loved people, but in the sense that it wasn't personal to me ever. And so going to church was just something I did. And when I went from private school, which was our Catholic school, to public school, I realized that I was smarter than everybody else, because the private school was way better at teaching things than the public school. And
Right.
Right.
I'm sure I would have been so much smarter if I was homeschooled.
Yeah. That's
but
right.
Amen.
That's
that's episode 6 for you guys, right?
there you go.
Right.
Yep.
Shout out.
Right.
I know how to do these
Thank
things.
Yeah, you do.
Yes. Nice.
So I surpassed my classmates, and unfortunately, I realized the only way to fit in was to conform myself to them. So I was the Catholic kid that cursed. I was, I never, and still to this day, like, I've never done drugs, and I have never drank alcohol, and that's not really my doing. That's definitely the Lord kind of protecting me. So I grew up in that rebellion, and so my rebellion was to sink further and further into not depression, but I just wasn't happy. I was lethargic, and it wasn't until I got on my cross country team, where there was a group of people who, like, that was my first team. Like, that was an amazing experience, and I'm really glad I did it, even though I was terrible at cross country. I can run long distance, but you also have to be fast too, and no one told me that. So
I can't do either, so you're good.
Yeah, I know, right?
I was much better at tennis, and so I really should have gone that direction, but it's definitely Lord's providence that I kept with it. And so I was always into not really occultic things, but I was into the weird stuff. Like, I wanted to know about the supernatural and aliens and all that stuff. And so my friends, knowing who I was, and they were a group of Christian people that lived ecstatic lives, who were outgoing and really just full of grace with me, even though I was sometimes a big jerk to them. They knew that there would be these books that I would be interested in reading, because they were about people that disappeared and a mystery that unfolded, and it could be aliens and UFOs, and they turned to a page that talked about that. I was like, all right, that's clearly up my alley. Well, it ended up being the first book in the Left Behind series. And for better or for worse, for what you Calvinists might think about Left Behind,
Right.
yeah, I read half that book in a single night, and I had to stop because it was in that book where God became personal, and it wasn't a God that was far off. It was a God that wanted to have a relationship with me, and that gospel presentation in that book broke me. I mean, just absolutely wrecked me. I was on my knees in tears. It was the gospel, everything that I had learned up until then. Like I still understood the Bible and the gospel's message. But that's when the gospel came home and broke down. And, I'm not into, Pentecostal type, outpouring, but I definitely felt the Holy Spirit come upon me like that night. It was that drastic of a change. And within the scope of falling asleep after praising God and waking up the next day, I had no desire to curse, and I didn't curse, and I don't even like trip on it at all ever. And it was such a stark contrast that the very next day, people were asking me what was different and why I was like beaming, and I knew I had to tell people, so. I told my entire school about Jesus that next day. Yeah. So, hey, Vice Principal, have you heard about Jesus Christ? Is he your Lord and Savior? Because let me tell you about him. And
that's
like me, the day before would have been like, sunk down, jacket overhead, like, don't talk to me. I'm super emo, Patrick, but
super emo.
So I'm definitely still introverted, but I'm able to do podcasts where I get to talk to people about Christ and interact with mean atheists online who just need some love.
That's so cool with the Left Behind book. Was that back in the 90s? That you read that, or early 2000s?
It was early 2000s for me.
Early 2000s? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I have my associate pastor, that I believe that's how he came to hear Christ too, is Left Behind. So that's really cool.
Yeah. So I for a while there, I was doing two churches. So I went to 7:30 in the morning mass still. I went to their youth group. I went to 10:30, a different church, and that church just so happened by mere coincidence and random chance to be talking about end times prophecy. And it wasn't like the height of the Left Behind stuff, but it was in that era. And I just so happened to find a church driving along, and that so happened to be the church that my friends who gave me the book were going to. And so I convinced my mom that, hey, if I go to 7:30 in the morning, on a Sunday, can I then go to this church? And she approved it, and I'm sure she's not too happy with it anymore. But then I would go to the Catholic youth group, and then go to the Christian youth group. So I was like super into God, everything. And so,
that's so amazing for a teenage boy to be like, hey, I'll get up early on a Sunday.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Wow.
Especially after running 10 miles like that. That's that same weekend and stuff like that. So yeah, it was crazy. But I kept reading, and then I pretty much read anything like Tim LaHaye had, and he had this book called Mind Siege, which was about secular humanism back when that was a threat, and now it's come to full realization. But in there, he was talking about how idolatry Catholics had in their churches, and that was just no, I mean it's not idolatry, it's fine. And then I kept ruminating on it more and more, and eventually that's the kind of the pebble that broke the dike, and that's when I took about 6 more months to stop being Catholic, and I still followed my parents' wishes to keep attending Catholic Mass until I was 18, and then I pretty much stopped being Catholic fully. So my parents, when they found out, you've been Catholic for 18 years, why can't you keep being Catholic? And so any gospel presentation was just, they can talk about it, but you can't talk about it back. So that's kind of how all theological discussions are. although there are time to time when my mom will ask me, like, you know, a neighbor's hurting because his wife has died. What can I talk to him about? Because she knows that, you know, I'm in God's word, and you know, it's sad that she doesn't kind of have that outlet as well, because you know, she just has the ability to pray to Mary and the saints, and you know, our Catholicism isn't definitely an American Catholicism. You know, like my mom never felt the need to like go to confession because you know, she can take her sins to God. That's, you know, that's boilerplate. Like, you know, you need to go to the vicar of Christ and have your sins, you know, forgiven by the emissary of God, and you know, so that probably added more to, well, you're not living consistently within Catholicism as well. And you know, there's just a lot that I think American Catholics don't understand about the Roman Catholic Church, and that's definitely not everyone, but there's a lot of times where it's like when you're talking to Mormons, you have to figure out, okay, in what capacity are you Mormon? You know,
Right.
If the elders are coming to your door like you had, you know, you don't have to convince them, you know, what Joseph Smith's first vision was, but you might have to with you know, your next door neighbor who's a Mormon.
Right. Yeah. That's a big difference. That's really fascinating. So listeners, let's definitely be praying for Patrick's family. Have you had any fruit within your family with cousins or siblings or anything to that nature?
So I had an aunt who also accepted Christ and started attending a Protestant church. So, you know, we're kind of secretly high-fiving each other at family dinners
that's
when
awesome.
something's, you know,
Yeah.
That's really
Praise
cool.
God.
Is it primarily Catholic where you guys live in Michigan?
No, primarily where we're at, it's Reformed. Yeah,
Reformed. Oh, really?
We're the Mecca
Nice.
of Reformed thought, because
we're right down from Grand Rapids, where Calvin, you know, is.
Calvin College.
Calvin College is, and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
It's a huge.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, everyone got too cold here and decided to pick up books and become Reformed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can't leave
Such
your
a good
house
analogy.
on time. Yeah, I like that. Y'all need to send some of those people over to Bismarck, because it's lacking. It's lacking in Reformed churches. I think there's one, but it's a Presbyterian. But anyways, we love our Presbyterian Reformed friends. Sorry.
Yes.
So
it's okay. They just have more, you know, swimming lessons.
Yeah.
They do.
There you go.
It's fine.
Early on. Yeah.
So funny.
I didn't know
really
that was a thing whenever I became Reformed. I had never heard of that. And so when we went to our first church that was Presbyterian Reformed, and wasn't called Presbyterian Reformed Church. It was called something else, and they were baptizing babies. My husband leaned over and he was like, "Are we in a Catholic church?" It's like,
so they were hiding their Presbyterian kind of under the surface, if you will.
I definitely didn't see anything about it on their website, but I suppose I know there's other types of like Dutch Reformed and stuff. It might have been something like that, but I didn't know a lot about any of that just yet at that point. But yeah, my husband and I, we grew up in Pentecostalism, and so like there's just there's you baptize as an adult, or you're Catholic and you baptize as babies, and we didn't know there was any other like in between. And he was like, "This is a Catholic church, isn't it?" I don't think so. I don't know, but we can't leave right now. We're in the middle of the service, so we're at the front of the aisle.
I know, that's the thing. When you check out churches, you have to go for the whole thing. You can't like, especially if it's a small church and you're checking it out and you're like halfway through, you're like, okay, but I can't stand up and leave. They'll see you. They'll know.
They'll know. Yes.
They'll know.
Yeah, they were really sweet, wonderful people too. So I was happy to be there. But it's really fascinating to me, Patrick, that you came out of Catholicism and were able to through the mysticism, because Catholicism kind of lends itself to mysticism a little bit with their like with the necklace thing that you were talking about, that if you wear it, you know, as long as you have it on, you won't
go to purgatory. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So you know, there's all sorts of rules for that, but essentially everyone's going to purgatory, so it's all right.
Right. Yeah. Everybody is. Yeah. When did you guys both, when you got saved, did you initially know about Reformed theology right away, or is that something that kind of grew over time?
Well, for me, I work nights, and everyone pretty much left us. So I was working 6 to 7 days a week at work by myself.
Wow.
And, you know, sometimes when it's too cold, nothing happens there. And so I was looking for things to occupy my time other than, you know, insane YouTube videos about follow the rabbit trail. And so I came upon like Todd Farrell and you know, subscribed to Wretched, and then I went through all of Wretched stuff from that point. And then there was this thing called like the Bart Ehrman response or something. It was
Hour.
Yeah, no, he's the comedy hour. Where it was a group of scholars talking about Bart Ehrman, and so I was like, all right, well, you know, I'm looking for content, and there just happened to be one person that actually had a YouTube page and had a lot of stuff for me to watch. And that was James White. And so
awesome.
He made me go down a terrible rabbit trail where I for 7 months I did nothing but learn Reformed theology. And,
right. Was that recently or within the last few years?
Yeah, so that was like 6 years ago.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So really cool. I'm kind of a mishmash of like, you know, people are like, oh, you know, are you Reformed Baptist or Presbyterian or what are you? And I just go, I'm Christian. I can't put a label on it. I'm sorry. Like, you know, when you subscribe to, you know, private Facebook groups and they're like, oh, you know, what denomination are you? I feel bad because they're like, I'm Christian, and it seems like one of those, you know, religious answers where you're like, there should be no division amongst the church.
Right.
No, I you know, there's like other Patrick Christian, like there's me. So
yeah.
Awesome.
That's great. That's really, really cool. How did you guys meet?
So I was dating Tony's daughter. Yeah, and he was still going for his doctorate in philosophy. I was minoring in philosophy because I needed a minor for my college one, and so his family was sick and tired of him talking about philosophy for all those years he was in school. And me, I'm like, this is awesome. Like, I think, therefore I am. And we're talking about the matter of things, and like God holds the perfect triangle in his mind. And so the form there is, you know, where we come. And so he was like, yes, finally, someone who's not going to, you know, shake me off when it, so we kind of hooked back up again when I moved back into town for work, and we realized that we needed to get together again to do something, because for some odd reason he likes me, and of course how could I not like Tony? And so kind of picked a chapter on a book, and then we found a book by that, and it just so happened to be Jason Lyle's Ultimate Proof for Creation. We read that and became presuppositionalists, and I think I accidentally made Tony change the topic of his dissertation for his doctorate.
Wow.
So Tony is really really nice and gracious, but he's silently cursing me in his
silently cursing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
on the inside.
Like in the Midwest, we have, you know, oh, bless your heart. It's that type of cursing.
Bless your heart. Yep. I heard that a lot growing up. Every time I ran into another doorknob or a wall. Bless your heart.
Right.
Somebody get that poor girl a doctor.
That's so cool how you guys met.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I couldn't break up with Tony.
Right.
That is so funny. Oh my goodness. So what do you guys do now for work besides an awesome podcast / YouTube channel?
Well, to work you got to get paid, and we're not getting paid yet for it.
Yeah.
So I teach philosophy.
I was so nervous whenever Dr. Lyle came on the podcast that like I didn't even put the video. I couldn't because I was just like terrified, and I didn't want him to see me over here going, that's interesting. Yes, sir. Okay. So he just saw my little icon thingy, and that was it. That was kind of scary. But you guys got to have him on, and that must have been really neat since y'all were working on his book. I was so excited about that because I was like, okay, I have absolutely zero cool questions to ask, but these guys are going to be able to ask him something really, really cool. So that must have been fun for y'all.
Yeah, well, Tony skipped out on me, and so he left me to do it by myself, and that was nerve-wracking. Yeah. And so I just got to, like, all my interviews are terrible because it's just, I really like this person. I can't believe I'm talking to them. Like, all you have to do is say, I have a podcast, and people will talk to you. That's bizarre.
That weird? Yeah, it is weird.
And so
weird.
I was recently name dropped talking to Dr. Robert Murphy, an economist and a Christian. And I was saying, like, what's it like to be like Brad Pitt for me? Because like, I know, like, Dr. Mitch Stokes, like I'm holding his book. I've read his book. I've read his other stuff. He's like a celebrity to me, and he's like, yeah, I'll come on and do a podcast that has like 20 people watching. That's fine.
I know. I'm so glad you said that. I'm gonna use that phrase because it's so true when you go meet some people. Like, I think when I went Costi Hen, my husband was like, you need to stop fangirling. You need to calm down. Like. Oh. And it's so true though, but it's like, you don't want to put these people on a pedestal, but I'm like, you have no idea what the impact you've had on my life. And I just want to share it. I'm just so excited.
Oh, just wait until you see that Robert Murphy interview. You're like, do you not, do you hate anybody? Like, no, all these people are lovely.
Oh my goodness, that is so exciting! I can't wait to see that. Are you guys planning on getting anybody else?
What's lined up? What's coming up?
Jay Warner Wallace is our one that we're doing Monday, and and then
so it won't come out Monday, but we'll be talking to him on Monday.
Yeah,
sure.
And then we have our book that we're finishing up by Mitch Stokes, How to Be an Atheist, and then I think we're gonna pull some like one shots and pull out some of the books that we've read in the past and just kind of give like an overview. That way people can say, don't these people ever shut up about the same book? And so,
I saw that you guys have the Goodreads. Like,
cool.
I thought that was so cool. So listeners, if you want to check out what they're reading right now or what they have read, they have a Goodreads list for their own particular podcast section. And that's so cool. I was like, I messaged that to Lauren. I was like, we got to do this too, so people can see what we're reading if we forget to mention about it or what have you. It's so
Make
cool.
Make sure to put a link to that in the comments or the show notes below, so that you guys can find that list of good reads, because that is really, really cool. I love that you go chapter by chapter, though. That helps me so much.
Yeah, well, and that was kind of one of the points that, I mean, we're doing it anyways. Like this isn't anything that other than me editing another video. This isn't like putting more stuff on our plate. Like, we meet every 2 weeks roughly and do a chapter that we would be doing. It's just, well, let's film it, and if people want to watch us, then they can. And we've done this one before, but we feel like someone's not just going to pick this up because there might be hard concepts or hard words, or when you talk about science, it might not appeal. Or when you're just talking philosophy, it's like, that's for people who I think therefore I don't even know what that means, or aren't those just old dead people, or people on the campus who are flighty and don't really know what they're talking about? Not Tony. Tony is he's vibrant, and he makes the students teach, which is genius.
That is smart.
So we're just like, we can break this down for people who would be nervous to get into this. And again, Tony's the big man who knows everything about philosophy. There's nothing.
That's so cool. Yeah,
because
you're a professor. Where do you teach at, Tony?
I teach at the University of Michigan in Flint.
Wow!
And in Flint. That's so cool.
That's really, really cool. That's exciting too, because I'm one of those people that I have a hard time understanding concepts when I'm reading something, as I have dyslexia. So anytime I try to actually sit down and read something, the ideas can get all jumbled up in my head. But I want to read and I want to learn these things because they're fascinating. But it's hard for me to do that without like some kind of commentary or help on the side. And so whenever I saw you guys, I was like, it's like you were designed for people with all kinds of neurological issues. Like, it's so perfect because you do take the time to explain as you're going along the words and the phrases and things like that to a point where it can be understood. So I'm really thankful for that. I'm looking forward to the interviews and the one-offs too. I think that'll be really fun. But
well, thanks, because we were, I mean, it's hard to determine whether or not what we're doing is coming across the way that we hope it is.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But I think your guys' podcast is a publisher's dream. Seriously.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of publishers, and this seems to be like one of those, like, podcasting is cool because, and I can take this out later, but podcasting is cool because we have a niche, right? Like we have a specific group of people that we can reach. And the publishers, on the other hand, if they want to send out mass ads or, try to reach just a huge amount of people, most of the people that they're reaching probably don't really care. But you guys have a specific audience. And for a publisher, I hope that they're paying more attention. I know a couple of the authors I've talked to have said that publishers are starting to pay more attention to podcasts because you have this audience, this group, and they're going to like be interested in the books that you talk about. They're going to want to go and buy those books. So it's really, really neat.
Right. And it's not just like the ones that are coming out. Like if you have a back catalog of like books that you wrote in the 90s and you have the author there or even the publisher who's, like, hey, we found, this person's collection of books and we're doing one last sale on it. Like, it's not like the New York Times anymore controls who's reading stuff. Like Joe Rogan sells more books than the New York Times does.
Yes.
Wow, that's so true when you think about it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So like there's a guy, Thaddeus Russell. So yeah, he just sells a lot of his same book because he goes on Rogan's podcast, people search his name and he sells books that, it's not like he's writing a new one. He's just talking about whatever he's talking about.
Yeah, the same old book. That's brilliant. I love the idea too of like the back catalogs. So I think that's going to be a big deal for podcasting in the future.
Yes, and if Joe Rogan ever asked you guys, would you go on his podcast?
No. I mean, I'll force Tony on there, but I watched enough Joe Rogan. Like I would put the Apologia guys or James White or Jeff Durbin. Like Jeff Durbin is called out Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan's idea of biblical history is that Constantine picked all the books of the Bible and that Moses got his idea of loving others from the burning bush, which is this like magical tree that gets you high and you come up with like ayahuasca type vision.
That sounds like Joe Rogan.
So that's why he offered pot to Elon Musk.
Oh yeah. I mean,
wow, right?
Yeah. Wow. So he's got some really bad history that he keeps repeating over and over, and you can't ever go into YouTube comments or like on Reddit and just be like, there's Joe Rogan again. Constantine didn't do anything. He called a session. That's all he did. Yeah. And they didn't choose books about, and it's just like we
not
did
even what they were talking about. It wasn't even the point of that council. I know that drives me.
I mean, I would point him to a book like Michael J. Kruger has written numerous books showing just how the canon arose from the church utilizing the books, and that there's these false beliefs that Bart Ehrman subscribes to that a German philosopher theologian came up with, and it's just the only reason it wasn't debunked back then was because World War II was occurring, and no one was translating this, no one was interacting with ideas other than Nazism and old Americanism back then.
But we have since then, like it's all, and it's so amazing to me that these guys, it should be embarrassing to them, like when they realize how easily debunked this is.
It should be, but it's also embarrassing to Christians too. And so it's one of those things where we fail to learn from our history. And all my quotes are from other people's ideas. So James White always says that the two biggest thing that helps him in his ministry is the original language, especially Greek, and knowing and learning church history, because all the false ideas that are current now have already taken place and have already been answered by people way smarter than us, that devoted way more pages, that spoke way more eloquently, that interacted with better ideas than Richard Dawkins or the guy that I'm always arguing with on Facebook that doesn't give me an alternate worldview and it's just mean to me. But I'm like, well, you're by doing laughing faces on my post, you're actually bolstering my post, so I'm not gonna
Yeah.
Thank
you.
I'm, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Yep. How dare you?
Yeah, I know, right? I try not to ever block atheists. I have a few that come onto the blog. Anytime I talk about creationism, and I'm like, go ahead, keep going.
So I will remove posts for language and for flat Earth. So I will let you say that, you know, Jesus was only a man or never existed, but you will not say that the Earth is flat. I will not let you onto my anything. Sorry.
Yes.
Gosh, they are all over the place.
They are
flat earthers.
Well, and you know, like that's and not for everyone, but it's a byproduct of a failure of especially the American or the Western church. Like we've failed to encapsulate what the church was supposed to be. And so, you know, you ask sometimes, you know, why should we read? It's one of those reasons, because it's a lot of it's already been done before. And we're just, you know, oh, well, it's not written by a smiling person on the cover. And again, I know that's not everyone, especially in the circles that we run in, but it's like, you know, how many times do we need to write the same book that was written in 325 AD by, you know, Athanasius, and you know, he did the heavy lifting. He's interacted with the best stuff, and you know, we can learn from that. We don't need to write it all over again. And so
and all of those books are in the public domain now, so it's they're free. The new books they're going to cost a lot of money, but Athanasius stuff is free. That's why I love the old stuff. Whenever I first got into blogging and I wanted to do a book review each week, I was like, man, this is going to get really expensive. Are there any books in the public domain? And it was like anything from like, you know, 1700s back.
Before Mickey Mouse. Yeah.
Yes. It's all free. I love it. Yeah.
Right.
That's a really good point. I was excited to hear Dr. Lyle say that he's going to be working on flat earth stuff, because that is really annoying. But it is an issue with reading, which is why I'm thankful that you guys are promoting reading and talking about all these different important topics, because we don't know how to, especially my generation and the generation prior to mine, we don't know how to reason. We don't know anything about logic, and we don't want to. Like, there's no desire for that within our generation. So it's that spans across whether you're atheist or you're Christian.
Yeah, I mean, Tony could probably talk about that, just the people that he sees in his classroom and what that's like.
Yeah. Is it getting worse as the years go along, or have you seen like a progression, or have you seen anything getting better?
Yeah, I would say so. I've been teaching for maybe about 10 or 12 years, actually. I wouldn't say it's getting worse. Society clearly is getting worse, right? With all the new morality and that kind of stuff. And so in terms of that, people are buying into that pretty much, you know, so that's getting worse, clearly. But you know, in terms of how they think, their worldviews, you know, it's pretty much been the same, I think, especially at a school, you know, the kind of school that I work at. So you know, that's I think that's probably what I would say. The relativism is huge. You know, students, I teach a lot of ethics classes, and you know, everybody believes that basically, you know, whatever is true for me is true for me.
Yes.
You know, that kind of stuff. So, you know, and it, you know, so I wail away at that on my classes, you know, to try to, you know, make sure that they clearly understand the implications of trying to say something like that, right?
That's great.
So something like that, that's getting worse, because that's what we see in society today, right? I mean, it's, you know, it's whatever, I'm whoever I think I am, right?
Right, yes.
You know, regardless of what my biology says or whatever, right? So that kind of stuff.
Do you feel? Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, on the Christian side, we're always waiting for the response book in order to know what to think, or and again, I'm making so many generalities here, and of course this doesn't apply to you, the listener, because you know you're doing the independent thing, and you're not doing what I've done in the past. So I'll say this about me. So you know, like when the Da Vinci Code came out and everyone was up in arms, and this was the thing that was gonna rock Christianity and bring it to its knees, and we were going to learn that the thing that we had to do was kneel at Mary Magdalene's grave at the Louvre, you know. oh gosh, that was such a boring book. Like, I love bad movies, like really bad movies and cheesy, like just old
like
monster
what?
movies.
I'm trying to think like what?
Like
movies?
Them about giant ants. Oh, it's so good. Or Earth versus the Flying Saucers, or
Did you watch Bird Epidemic?
Yes, Birdemic.
Birdemic.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's Birdemic, shock and horror, technically.
Shock and horror.
Yeah.
It's from the guys who did it's an actual movie that a guy from Silicon Valley, he was a software engineer.
Yeah,
Is that what he was? Just one dude. He's like, I'm gonna make a movie. It's terrible, but it's so funny.
It's so good.
It's so terrible. Good. It's so good. Yeah. And then the Mystery Science Theater 3000 guys.
That's what I grew up on.
Riffed it. Yeah, me too. I love them. Yeah. And so they did a riff on it, and it's hilarious. It's on Amazon Prime, I think, if anybody wants to watch that. We should link that in the notes. Tony, have you seen it?
I have not seen it. No.
Oh my gosh,
Tony likes good movies.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, yes. But I can't stand, like, books. To me, like, my time is precious. So I can get enjoyment out of somebody telling me a bad story, but I can't suffice to read or to listen to a bad book. And Da Vinci Code was explanation, a little bit of something not back to explanation. And I'm reading this, and from my background in, like, not the occult, but the weird stuff before I was a Christian, like, this wasn't new information to me. I was like, oh yeah, I know this, like, this is I think it was like called like One Blood, One Faith or something like that. And there are people who actually believe that. And we were all just waiting for the response book to tell us that, that it wasn't Mary Magdalene, it was John in Da Vinci's painting, or, it was,
right.
We're always just waiting for the response book, rather than let's deal with the arguments there. Let's identify what's being written on the page in front of us. And that goes for, the guy with the brilliant white teeth who is trying to lead us into heresy, and also the atheist who wants to tell us that God is evil, and just saying, well, hold on, let's define our terms. Yep. Would go a long way. And so that's just one of the things that I appreciate about what we're doing, as far as just Tony wanted to do with me, is just helping me learn all these good apologetic resources. And it's not just apologetics that we do. We just do stuff that we find interesting, like Michael J. Kruger is just amazing, although you could call it apologetics in some capacity.
I was going to ask you guys, like, what books would you recommend for the listeners out there? And I'm really asking for me. I'm curious. I saw your Goodreads, but I'm like, what were great starters for you guys?
One good book that we went over maybe last year or something like that, Nancy Pearcey's Finding Truth. So good. She gives, I think she has like she gives 5 ways to kind of examine worldviews and that sort of thing. It's really good. I'm working through her Love Thy Body now, where she takes on the transgender, all the sexual stuff.
Nice.
It's really good.
It's really good.
Yeah. I'm reading through it right now. She's coming on the program in November.
Cool. Yeah.
Yes.
We're going to talk to her about that book. But I also have the other one that you mentioned, because she did a special last month or something where it was like 99 cents. Anytime I see something like that, I'm like, I'm going to buy that for later.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are good. Those are really good options. I love Nancy Pearcey.
That's awesome. Any other apologetic books?
Andreas Kostenberger has a couple things out. Truth Matters is kind of a straightforward, clear book. He takes on Bart Ehrman there. He considers that
anything by Kostenberger is awesome. I mean, he's a prolific author. I'm like, what haven't you written on? Because he'll like, I swear he'll like comb the valley for like, okay, who's writing on something? All right, my name's going to be attached to it. I'm going to make it so much better.
Oh wow, that's a blessing. Yeah.
If you want a really practical book that's really kind of cuts to the chase, I would suggest somebody like Greg Kogel. He was written Tactics, And so he goes over, various tactics in terms of how you can discuss your faith with unbelievers. And it's really, he names these various tactics, the judo flip, in terms of
oh wow, there's names for these things.
Yeah, turning questions around and that kind of stuff. So that one is kind of a really
the
practical.
Judo.
I think that's the name of it. It's something like that. But anyway,
that's so cool.
If it's not, it should be. That's all.
Yeah. And are you guys? Do you guys have a book, or are you guys thinking about making one in the future together? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Patrick, are you considering?
Oh, I mean, I think all my ideas are distilled down from other people. Like there's that quote that from Spurgeon that goes like, "The man who never reads will never be read, and he who never quotes will never be quoted, and he will not use the thoughts of other men's brains, prove he has no brains of his own." Like, I'm good with that. Like, I'll read and
so humble. I love that.
Yeah, I mean. I've got a few like blog posts, like our friend at Veritas Forum is going on vacation. And by that I mean going like behind the Iron Curtain to spread the word to people. And so there's a few blog posts that I've got lined up for that. But awesome.
Awesome.
Nothing right now, but who knows? Maybe it's something I'll stumble upon.
But,
those are great ones. King James Only Controversy by James White. It's a good primer for understanding where we got the transmission of Scripture, and it does deal with King James Onlyism, which we still interact with on a daily basis, at least in my ministry. But it's so good for wanting you to go down the rabbit hole of like translation, transmission of the text, stuff like that. Anything by Michael Kruger is amazing, like that. Canon Revisited,
Heresy of Orthodoxy.
Yeah, Heresy of Orthodoxy. We've done everything together except for Canon Revisited, so that might be on our list coming up here.
That's
awesome.
Cool.
Puritan Theology, Doctrine and Life edition by Joel K. Beakey, or also Living for God's Glory, an Introduction to Calvinism. Both those are good because we have this false understanding of what Puritans were and who they are, especially that Living for God's Glory. There's a chapter in there about like love, sex, marriage, the family, that people are like, oh, the Puritans were this, nose up in the air, hoity-toity. Like if you spit on the sidewalk on the Lord's Day, then you were kicked out of the community. And just reading their writings, you get such an appreciation for people who lived at a different time, who didn't have access to the writings we did, or the technology we did, or the cross references that we do, and they like knocked it out of the park. And they're just so amazing to learn about, and not the torrid history that you'll learn from half an hour in high school history class, but the real actual people, and go to the sources and read the actual sources of the people. That's one thing that we can do, instead of just and God bless them, we're all reading John MacArthur, and he's pulling quotes from people. Well, actually go to those quotes and read it, like The City of God by Augustine. That's a really good one. I mean, he talks about like existence of evil, conflict between free will and divine omniscience, the doctrine of original sin, and like if you get your free ebook, because it's been translated 62 different ways by people. You're not reading these and thous and old script language. People have translated it into modern day English, and so just reading what the people back then had to deal with and where they were at, finding out where they lived and what they were facing and any persecution that they were subjected to, and the fact that they're so much smarter and took so much more time and had access to less information, and did so much more with it. I mean, it's a statement against the church today, and that's not to say that people aren't doing good things now, and it's not saying don't read John MacArthur or don't read R.C. Sproul, but it's that whole adage of like there's nothing new under the sun, and it's just awesome to go back to people and say, oh, Athanasius got kicked out of the church 6 different times by by just saying that no, the Trinity is this, and we understand the Trinity because of the sacrifice that he made. Like, oh, that's amazing. Like, I want to learn about that guy. Like that guy, I want a T-shirt with him on it. And, you know,
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
come on, missional wear, like go back a little bit further.
Yes, one of my heroes of the faith right there is Athanasius for sure. So when you mentioned that, I think on Facebook or Instagram, I can't remember now, I was like,
yeah,
yes,
I cheated.
oh my goodness. I was
You asked for reformers.
To...
I went, well, you know, reformers.
I mean, that's even better, I think.
Yeah. Proto-reformer.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's just a wonderful point too, to say, like, I mean, it is good to read the people of today. And like, I agree with you, you know, R.C. Sproul and MacArthur, but before I would want to get into those guys, I do think it would be helpful for people if they want to start somewhere, if they started way back when with the people that you just listed, with the ideas that you were just giving, and Athanasius and Justin Martyr. One of my favorite things to do is to read the patristic fathers' writings, because it's free too.
Right.
And
we can buy it for $1.
Yeah, we have it. Like, it's amazing that that's even still available to us today, that we can read what they were writing with the people who learned from the apostles. It's amazing.
And it's the universal church. It's exactly, you know, we're able to take part in the universal church today so much more than they were. You know, you know, if our brothers over in China are you know, failing, they know that they're part of something greater. Where you know, if you're in Alexandria in Egypt at the time when you know Carthage is burning, or you know, the Roman occupation could be coming in. You know, hey, we're the end of Christianity, right? Because we haven't experienced any outside, you know, influence from other people. Like we have the Bible, and that's about it. And you know, Athanasius got kicked out, and so you know, what are we to do? And so you know, it's just awesome that we're able to, you know, read people and in different contexts and in different settings, and you know, you can, you know, read about what does God say about screen time and our children, and you know, there are biblical principles to pull from. But it's also really cool to see, you know, hey, what was Calvin facing when he got kicked out of you know, his congregation, and you know, he wrote letters, and so we can take part in understanding, you know, the universal church and the history of it, and we just need to kind of look back more than, you know, 2 weeks for our
I love that. That's such a good, like, it's so good to be reminded of that, because like people to read about the reformers and people in the faith, that they kept the faith unto death, and we're reading from them. And I remember someone mentioned that before, to read about more about the Puritans and reformers, and really hear from people that kept the faith through their entire life.
Yeah, I mean, just with like the reformers, how do you have like stuff like stapled to your tongue? How do you survive 14 years in a dark cell because you wouldn't baptize your children? You know, like how can I say, like, well, you know, an atheist was mean to me online, and you know, it's making me question my faith. Like I don't know how I would survive, you know, like death knocking at my door with the Black Plague, children dying, you know, my wife possibly dying because of childbirth, but I need 17 kids in order to like continue the family. And on top of all that, say, you know, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Like, yeah, I can do that when, you know, my boss yells at me, but can I do that when I'm like, you know, my limbs are being chopped off and I'm being hunted? Like, like I'm able to be blessed by people who did, and it's possible. And that's amazing. And it, you know, it goes back to our apologetics. Like, you know, would the apostles have given their life for a lie? And, you know, they didn't make any money off of it. So they're a terrible pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
You know.
I've never heard it like that. That's so funny.
Yeah, they didn't get a whole lot from the world there.
Yeah.
Some crucifixions upside down and whatnot. But yeah, I love that too, because it really helps as well whenever you're dealing with cults or false churches, things like that. If you have a little bit of a historical knowledge alongside like some logic and some philosophy, if somebody comes to my door and knocks and they're, you know, wearing a white t-shirt and a tie, ordinarily they're going to be telling me things about history that are not true. And it's the same with the Catholic Church. If somebody from the Roman Catholic Church comes to my blog and they're wanting to argue with me, it's usually historically inaccurate what they're saying. So it helps to have that sort of a bigger scheme. And it also helps, like you were saying, Becca, with encouragement, because we have this 2,000 years of history of watching God miraculously save these wretched sinners and then bring them through faithfully, even in these, like you were saying, like stapling the tongue. Pretty sure staples back then didn't look like they do now.
They were giant screws.
Yeah. We can call it stapling, but I don't think it was as sterile, because I remember being a kid in school and the dumb thing to do was to like see who could staple their hand. That's probably not what it was like then.
Yeah, well, when you can bifurcate your church when that appeasement ended, and you have half the church that didn't have tongues because they were cut out, or that they're dead and their bones were burnt and they were declared anathemas by the mother church, then it's hard. And that it's another thing when we read about that, and we read that that's not just Catholic against Protestants. Sometimes that was Protestants against Protestants, and we need to be careful because of how this world is. It could, and I'm talking as an American and a part of a Western civilization, it could all crumble apart, and we could all fraction into our theocracy, and are we willing to burn people at the stake for not baptizing their children? And what do we do with that? Like, how do we view Christian history when Christianity became almost synonymous with the state? And we always have to be careful about that, because if Luther can get kicked out of his church, and then Calvin the same way, but for vastly different reasons, and at the same time Calvin has death threats against people in his own city. We always need to be careful of that, because we could, we're no different than those men, and so we need to recognize the planks and the barriers in our own eyes too, because if we're always looking to, oh well, our team's not in power now, let's just wait, are we really falling under the lordship of Christ, or are we trying to conform this world into our own image?
Right. Oh, I love that. That is a really good warning. I think we have an issue with that here. Before I got saved, actually, I was very politically minded. I would campaign and stuff for everybody. And so because that was my idol as a non-believer, when I became a believer, I was like, that was one of those things that had to just be completely and totally mortified in my life. But I do see it still, the idea of religious politics in it, and it is dangerous. I think that's a really good point, because beforehand, as a politically minded person, there was an enemy, right? Like the enemy was anyone who didn't agree with me politically. And so we can't have that mindset as a believer. Like you were saying, it wasn't just Catholics against Protestants, Catholics. There were Anabaptists being drowned because they didn't feel the same way as some of the other people. And so it is important that we see church history in an honest light, because we can't tend to make these people bigger than they were, right? More holier than they were, because we love their quotes and everything. But when you actually read the history, especially Martin Luther, boy, he was awfully salty. When you get to reading about him, you can kind of tell, like, oh, okay, he's kind of feisty like me. It's okay.
He was blunt.
Although he did have a theology of passing gas. So, I mean, you gotta give him credit. Gotta give him credit.
I think that was because of the beer.
Yeah.
I was about to say that. Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. So I have a quick question for you guys. What about books that you have read that you would not recommend? Like, have there been any books where you're like, oh gosh, I wish I had.
Besides the Da Vinci Code, or The Secret.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend the Da Vinci Code if it was good, because hey, you're gonna run into people that watch Oprah and
right,
think it's true. So yeah, so I have some that I would put in kind of the naughty category, but I mostly have like categories for it. And so things like anything prophecy based, and for my dispensational brethren, prophecy sells, and we're much more likely to go to conferences or watch YouTube videos that talk about prophecy than the holiness of God, or how to be mortification for sin. So anything like that, or anything like demon exorcism, it's just always poorly written. It's always not theologically grounded. It's more experience based. And the same thing with prophecy too. It's like, oh, here's the numerology of President Obama or President Trump, and the next Antichrist. But let's not take into effect that the Bible says this and this about the Antichrist as well. And let's at least hold off a little bit before we start counting blood moons and
yes,
and
right?
It's the Joel Osteen version of the Protestant church, sadly.
Yeah,
we're drawn into that because we want to know the secret things, and that's
would you guys ever? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, just that's what the early church dealt with the Gnostic teaching, is that hidden teaching, and luckily most of them said don't reproduce, so they were easy to buy out. But, everyone's the next Hal Lindsey, or bless his heart, Tim LaHaye, and I'm not bragging on him because he helped lead me to salvation. So,
bless his heart.
I think I have a little bit of authority to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Would you guys ever break down a Sid Roth, It's Supernatural show? And debunk it as you're going along? I would love that. That's a request.
For that, I think Cultish has already done that. They've done talking about Joe Rogan and him doing ayahuasca or DMT and having demonic visions after doing it for the 5th time, but the first 4 were really nice. And so, there's an understanding that, Satan can be an angel of light, and then, he gets you to acknowledge, that's a big thing when you watch the ghost shows. It's like, oh, I'm going to interact with these people, or I'm going to bring in a medium. Oh, all of a sudden it's gotten worse. So who would have thought?
Weird. So weird. Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what we used to do, especially in the Pentecostal church.
Here's what I want from ghost hunters, though. And, those videos are really fun to watch, too. I want them to actually hunt ghosts. If you see ghosts, don't run away. You're there to hunt ghosts. I'm here to prove the existence of ghosts. Oh, no, a noise. Not run towards it, run away from it. No, I'm kicking a ghost. I'm kicking a ghost, like that shadow person. If my foot goes through it, then I've proved the existence of ghosts, and I get a Nobel Peace Prize, don't I?
I love that.
I kicked a ghost.
Go towards the noise. Oh no, he banged a couple doors. Come on.
Seriously.
Hunt ghosts, ghost hunters.
They're always running away, right?
Yeah,
it's always that Blair Witch moment of they're running.
Or it'd be like if the Ghostbusters saw Slimer and just was like, all right, well, peace out.
Yes.
End of movie.
Goodness.
Just get a quick selfie and then go.
Right.
Yeah, after kicking it.
after you kick it, you have to kick. Yeah. If you're gonna go hunting seriously for anything else, you don't run.
Yeah. Oh, I saw a deer, got in my sights, run away.
Run away. That is such a good point. We used to be really obsessed with the ghost hunter shows before we got saved.
Yeah.
It was Zach Baggins.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I love Zach
Baggins. He's got such a weird hair. Yeah. That is definitely one of those shows that I used to but it's true that whenever you start to watch those things, everything is what was that? Did you hear that?
It is. Or they show the frequency or whatever. It's
Yep. That's really funny. We need to send this to them so that they know what they actually should be doing is actually hunting them. It's a good
Kicking
point.
Ghosts. Yeah.
Yes. Kicking ghosts.
We need a meme for that now, Becca. So, okay, we do have a very important question that I know that Patrick is aware of.
Yeah, we forgot about this. This is what we ask all our guests.
I'm going to ruin this question, though. Just let you know.
So, it's important, though.
How are you going to ruin it? How? Okay, I'm curious now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, Becca. I'll let you ask it.
Okay, it's pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Do you eat?
I could eat almost anything on a pizza. In fact, I can eat almost anything.
Yay!
It wouldn't be my favorite, but I would eat it. I've eaten it before, so yeah.
Wow.
I'm taking
first
that.
one. That's the first one in a while that you've gotten
Yay.
on your side.
I had Ray, we got Ray Comfort. That said yes.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, I think he anathematized.
He did.
I think he anathematized you.
I got told to repent. It was really hard. It was hard to hear.
I mean, but that's from a Kiwi, so you know.
Yeah, that's what I tell myself every night after I get done crying.
Yeah. Yeah. I am indifferent. I can eat it. I cannot.
Oh.
Like,
I'm gonna take that again.
Yeah. So like I have never had it
up.
until I married my wife, and she's like, "Let's try it." I'm like, "Does it have bacon on it?" Okay, there you go.
Right? Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
It's sweet.
I'll
it's
give
savory.
those to you. I'll give that to you, Becca.
Yay!
You win this one. This one.
Yay! And now we have shenanigans where we ask a couple of random questions. Feel free to shoot them down. Do you want to go first, Lauren?
No, I'm gonna let you go first, but also
you always have me go first.
That's because I think of mine as you're asking yours.
Oh, okay. She's so good at it, though.
I actually mentioned to Patrick ahead of time that we needed some really good dad jokes, so I think he's got some.
Yay!
So I don't know if you do or not, but I mean, we can do our fun shenanigan questions first and let you ruminate on it.
Well, let me ask: do you know why a nose can't be 12 inches long?
No, why?
Because then it'd be a foot.
That was good. Yes.
Two peanuts are walking down the street, and one of them's assaulted. That's my favorite one. That's my favorite one.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I love that. Oh my
I might have to make those as memes. Those are really good. Yes, like two little peanuts walking down the street. That's so cute.
Oh my goodness. Okay,
Yes.
I really like that. Those were good things. Okay.
Thank you. I had dad jokes before I was a dad, so I think I had kids just so that I could have like the card.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Do your kids like your dad jokes though? Because I find that I don't.
I make
get
them
any
because they're
laughs.
3 and 1.5. So.
So you make them like.
Yeah. So I laugh and they go, "Haha, what's funny?" I go, "The joke. The joke is funny."
Yeah.
The joke.
When Kaylee was that age, I taught her to tell people this joke, and she didn't understand it, but I still taught her to tell it to everybody. Is how do you know whenever a politician is lying? His mouth is moving, and she would tell that to everybody. It's so much cuter coming from her little bitty voice, but yeah, she didn't get it. But
that's great.
Yeah, you can make them laugh.
But she got the laugh, right? She did get the laugh, right?
Like that. Yep. I turned her into a monster because now she loves to make people laugh.
Nice.
So Becca, what is your?
I have two questions. I'm curious about both. So if the first one doesn't work, I have a backup.
Nice.
What's the best Wi-Fi name you've seen? That's my first one.
Wi-Fi name.
Like
That's
password
awesome.
name or name, whichever.
I love that.
It's probably like FBI van.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Funny.
Yeah.
I like
or
that.
not the CIA.
Not the CIA.
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen that one too. I have.
Yeah.
I saw one the other day that was like FBI investigation room or safe house or something like that.
Yeah.
That's
Guys
hilarious.
are so funny. My favorite though is whenever they call out neighbors like so and so from apartment 208 is a jerk or something.
That's hilarious.
And it's the 2G over the 5G one, and it's open.
Yes, stop stealing my stuff.
Yeah, right. Tony, have you seen one that's funny?
No, not really. I
couldn't even remember one. I've seen them, but I can't remember their names. I have another question. What's the most ridiculous fact do you know?
Tony, while you think, do you want me to go? Because I thought of one that
Sure, go for it. Yeah.
Okay. There was a plot to steal Abraham Lincoln's body.
Ah.
Yeah, that's my ridiculous fact. They almost did it too. It almost worked, but there was a tip off.
Wow.
And they had to transfer his body because when he died, they did a tour, like a
Oh, right, yeah.
An state tour, yeah.
Yeah, so he had the longest burial like anybody.
And present.
And, so
they got their selfies with him. They're like, yeah,
their selfies.
take a photo next to him. That's so weird.
Sorry it's about war, but I was reading a biography about Stonewall Jackson.
Ooh.
And they were talking about how George Meade, who was like kind of the first general for the Union, was so nervous about losing any part of the war that he wouldn't engage or anything. And so Jackson would take his men and order them to march in a circle so that only he would see like a portion of them at a time through the trees. And so he like quadrupled his numbers in Meade's mind by going around, and eventually like Lincoln had to fire him, but it was so long. It's amazing. Like it, talk about God's providence. Like there's so much of, once you learn like Civil War history or just history in general, and you're like, how did we survive? How did we get to here? That's bizarre.
Yeah.
Right.
Like or talking about the Manhattan Project. Like half the scientists were like, oh, well, it could be that we light the atmosphere on fire. Who knew? Like,
right?
We tested one, and that was a low yield, so who knows?
Yeah. That was a legitimate fear, right?
Yeah,
that was a legitimate fear. If we set this off, will it? Will the atmosphere burn?
There'll be no Nazis for sure.
Sorry about that, Tony. What did you think of a
ridiculous fact?
Fact. Yeah.
Yeah. How about Jeff Bezos is still the richest man in the world?
Wow.
Right? Oh, that's true. It's a ridiculous fact. Absolutely. That's hilarious.
Yeah, apparently Amazon lost a lot of,
right?
stock, money, but he's still the richest man. So.
That's really
That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. And he's getting a divorce, and he's still the richest.
Yeah. He had to give up a lot of his money, and he's still the richest man in the world.
That is insane. That tops it. Good job, Tony.
Do you have one, Becca? Do you have a ridiculous fact?
Oh, you know what else I was thinking was when you meet the Queen of England, you cannot turn your back around her if you leave the room.
Really?
So you have to walk.
Out?
You got to back out. Yeah. If you meet her in a room, so that's a weird fact.
Good thing we fought a war to turn our back on the Queen.
Yeah.
Whoa!
Right? Ooh. Yes.
I just want to say really quickly that we love all of our listeners from the UK. Anyways.
Yes. Long live the Queen.
Yes.
Long live the Queen. That's so funny. Oh my goodness. There was a time where the Queen was, or somebody from the royal family was in the hospital, and a radio program called in.
Oh, yes.
Story?
Yeah.
And they pretended to be a different royal family member, and the nurse believed them and actually handed the phone over to the Queen or something.
Yeah.
No.
It was a radio program, and they were just trying to prank everybody, and got everybody in trouble. It was actually a sad story, but I won't.
It is really sad.
And that radio host got his head chopped off. That's what royals do, right?
I think they got fired, and now the other family is suing. They were from Australia.
Really?
So a bunch of criminals broke the law. Weird. Sorry, we love all the people from our family in Australia.
I just want to say really quickly that we love all of our Australian listeners.
But the rest of the story is really sad. It's really legitimately super sad.
But that was weird. Yeah, that was a really weird one. Backing up from the Queen. Wow.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. I'm pretty sure I can't top that. I can't top any of that. Okay, so I do have a really weird question for you, guys. So this is going to be one of those I don't know, weird, difficult questions. Of all of the bad books, so we're talking the heretical things, Jesus Calling, all of that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think of the worst of the worst. I don't know if it gets worse than Jesus Calling. But if you had to do a public reading of your least favorite book, which one of your least favorite books would you do a public reading on, and why?
Just a book in general?
It's got to be one that you hate, one that you really don't like.
But you have to read it out aloud to a crowd,
or even on your podcast,
or on your podcast. Ooh, the whole book.
Yeah.
So you read the least favorite book, and why would I read it? Right? Is that what you're asking?
If you were forced to by gunpoint, yeah.
Wow.
That escalated really quickly.
Yeah,
that's the only reason I would do that on air is if somebody was forced.
Ooh.
You got Joel Osteen's, Best Life Now.
Ooh. I would do it in a British accent or something, or something. I don't know, just to offset that it's not really me, so they could hear, that I.
Like, don't turn your back to me.
Yeah. Stuff.
And Joel Osteen would always be facing you. So.
Yeah. With a smile.
I think you just like turn the page and it's like one of those kids pop-out books where his face is always
right
there.
Pop it up. Yes.
Yeah.
Ugh.
That's a hard question.
It was gross when they released a picture of him like at the beach, and I was like, "Ew, gross! No, people, don't do that. That's I don't care if the man worked out. That's disgusting. Come on." Ugh.
His teeth blinded the lens.
True.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So it's the one book that I would have to be held at gunpoint to read, because anything else I can read and like critique, but Wuthering Heights, I had to read it in high school.
Wow.
It is the worst book. Like I would rather.
It is really sad.
Oh, it's so poorly written. Like it's like one of those. It's a classic because people had said it was classics. Like some old biddy liked it back in the 1800s and was like, "This is a classic." It's awful. Like I would rather like put syringes in my tear ducts than read that book.
My goodness.
Syringes.
So like,
oh.
So like I would have to have a gun held to my head to read. Wuthering
Oh, that's
Heights.
pretty bad. Yeah.
I like that. That's a good answer.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay.
I thought you were gonna be like Benny Hinn.
I have a hard time coming up with worse books because usually, most books have at least some value to them. Even if they're bad or wrong or that sort of thing. So, I'm not sure. The reason I would read a book that I wouldn't like is, let's see. Well, because of the gun, but but probably so that other people could, hear it and see why I wouldn't like it. So
that's a good point.
We've done like the God Delusion and God is Not Great before, and used like presuppositional apologetics, and so we can utilize what we know to critique it. So yeah.
I like that. Yeah,
that's
what
really
I wanted
good.
to ask this question, because I was like, because you guys do that. What book would you not want to read then? Like, that's why I thought it would be interesting. So I like Tony's answer.
Yay, that was really good. I have a reformed funny joke. It's really quick.
What book would you read though?
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, that's good. I don't know. See, I would have been like Benny Hinn, Joyce Meyer, and did it in like a mocking voice probably, so people would know. And I would never want to read those books ever again. So it would have to be, I would never want to do that. I don't ever want to read those again. But my funny joke is, who is the most academic reformer? And the answer is Martin Luther. He submitted more than one thesis. And next week is the, anniversary of him doing his 95 thesis. So.
Yep. Well, when this comes out though, it'll be over. It'll already be passed. So.
Because it's next Thursday. Is this going to be posted next week?
Next Monday after next.
Oh, okay.
On the lineup. Yep.
Well, I'm just continuing the love.
Yes, that's right. We're going to continue the love of it.
The Reformation never
ended.
I know.
That's right. That's right. Ironically, Anchored North interview is the one that's going to be posted on Thursday. And Thursday is Reformation Day. And I didn't realize that. I was like, whoa, we probably should have planned that better. But anyways,
yeah, because we were gonna start segments about different reformers, and we could have had one on Martin Luther. We failed. We failed. Sorry, guys.
You could spin it like that you don't even want any handshake with Satan and his minions.
I love that.
Yes.
Yeah, because you're too busy out there kicking them.
You're too. Yeah.
Kick those ghosts, guys. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Patrick and Tony, so much for joining us.
Seriously.
And for participating in our shenanigans. Is there anything that we can be praying for you guys in the future, for our listeners to be praying for you?
Let's see. So I have a son in South Korea, and he teaches English as a second language. And he's working through his master's degree in there. So he's hoping to get finished by February of next year. So his name is Josh. So pray for Josh that he would finish that, and then maybe we could get him back home and he could work here.
Yes.
So that's a selfish prayer, I think.
That's okay. We'll pray it anyways.
Yes, we're praying. Yeah, we'll pray for Josh.
Yep, absolutely. And guys, be praying for Cave to the Cross Apologetics. I'm gonna make sure that I link to their YouTube and their podcast. You guys are available on a lot of platforms too, a lot of the podcasting platforms. If I think I saw like iHeart Radio.
Yeah, iHeart Radio.
Oh, cool. And Stitcher.
And Stitcher, yeah. So
like
of course iTunes.
And YouTube. You can
Patrick's the mastermind of. I'm just a pretty face, but Patrick's the
I'm just
of all of that kind of
really
stuff.
Yeah, it's like,
Lauren is my Patrick.
I was about to say Becca's my pretty face. Yep. And she keeps me from being sued, so that's really cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, guys, I appreciate you spending your Saturday morning with us. And
and does Patrick, do you need any prayer for anything?
Oh yeah, thank you, Ben.
Sorry.
Well, I would just say that just working with my family for especially my girls, since they're so young, that they're just they grow up in the strength and admonition of the Lord and come to saving faith in Christ. Because I really, it's odd would be the wrong word, but my wife comes from a Christian background, and when I hear a Newsboy song, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And she's like, oh no, I heard that in elementary school. And I'm like, oh, it's new to me.
It's new to me.
Big as Jesus, that's a great song. I feel way back in the 90s. It's because it was in the 90s.
It was in the 90s, yeah.
But just like I'm still coming to understand, like what it means to be a husband and father, and I've seen Tony lead his family, so he's definitely like a good foil that I can always draft off of. And so even in our podcast, I'm doing the same thing. So I'm just continuing to look at him and other people like that, so I can just make sure that I'm doing all that I can to glorify God, and especially in the work of my children.
Oh, I love that they both asked for prayer for their families and their kids. That's so sweet. I love your guys'
Well, we can't
heart.
ask about ourselves because that would be just not humbling enough. And we take pride in our humility on this podcast.
Absolutely.
That is awesome. Well, we'll definitely be praying for you for that. And I know it's being a father is a really difficult job, I hear. So I'm definitely going to be praying for you guys, and our listeners will be praying for y'all. And God bless you both. Thank you so much.
God bless you guys. Seriously.
You guys are awesome. Just keep doing everything you're doing because it's awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks for watching. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.